We are back. We survived. We made it. We have an NFL game on TV tonight for the first time since the Super Bowl. No, it's not going to be starters probably. No, it's not going to be maybe entertaining football that has great plays and great play calls, but it is football nevertheless with the Hall of Fame game on tonight, and I'm certainly looking forward to it. I'm going to watch the hell out of it, like I'm guessing most of you guys are. And the start of the Hall of Fame game means the NFL season is right around the corner, so I'm going to be feeding you guys some of these videos, short form, breaking down some of the things that I'm thinking about as it relates to the NFL with news that just broke or the information that's just come out or maybe some player futures that seem interesting or other topics to discuss related to the offseason and training camps as well as looking ahead to the regular season over the course of the next couple of weeks. So expect a couple of these every single week at a minimum. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Let's get started. The first thing I wanted to discuss doesn't really relate to anything on the field, nor does it impact the regular season, but it's just case in point as to how ridiculous it is right now in the AFC landscape to actually make it to the Super Bowl, and why all the criticisms of like some of these quarterbacks in the AFC mostly is unwarranted, sometimes is a downright foolish and ridiculous, given the fact that only one of these guys can actually make it to the Super Bowl. What am I talking about? The AFC quarterback landscape. The top 10 quarterbacks were just released by Madden video game. And number 1 and 2, well, they're both tied for number 1, Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Even though they stuck Lamar as number 2, when he's really tied with a 99 score as Josh Allen, I don't know why Lamar is given number 2. They should both be tied for number 1. But in either case, Josh Allen and Lamar both have a 99 score. Joe Burrow has a 97 and Patrick Mahomes has a 95. These just came out today. The next closest quarterback is an 88. After that is 87, and then there's 2 quarterbacks with 86 scores and 2 quarterbacks with 85 scores. We're talking about a large bunching between 85 and 88 of quarterbacks 5 through 10, and the rest of the NFL is obviously below that, but bunched close together to the number 10 quarterback. And way above, like a massive gap, from 88 all the way up to 95 is Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. This is a brutal landscape for the AFC. These 4 quarterbacks clearly are the 4 best in the NFL. They all are diverse. They all can do so many different things on the football field. They're all incredibly elite. And yet, only 2 of them could theoretically even make it to the championship game in the AFC each year. Only one of them can actually win that game and make it to the Super Bowl. And then they have to play the opponent in the NFC, and we just saw the Philadelphia Eagles have a very well-rounded and solid team with a good quarterback, and there's other NFC teams that are competitive. It certainly can give these AFC quarterbacks a test. And to have all 4 of these guys playing right now against one another head-to-head in the AFC, the 4 most elite quarterbacks by far in the NFL, it's ridiculous. It's going to be very frustrating because only one of these guys is going to have the possibility of even making a Super Bowl each year. We're never going to see the 4 best quarterbacks compete against one another in the Super Bowl. I mean, obviously one of the guys that are further below can jump up to a level this high, but Josh, Lamar, Joe, and Patrick Mahomes, they will never play one another in the Super Bowl. So that's a sad thought, but it's also just crazy how stacked the AFC is as it relates to quarterbacks. Another thing that came out that was where voting was involved was the NFL Top 100. And I know the NFL Top 100, whatever, the players vote on it. Some people don't care about it at all. I don't really care that much. But this is still insane to me. This is still something that we just have to mention on here. How in the world is Joe Mixon viewed by the players as a better running back than Bijan Robinson? He's not even close. Like he's not a better running back than Bijan Robinson. But even if you want to look at last year's statistics alone, which is what this list is banked on, they ranked Joe Mixon as the 56th best player in the NFL. Better than Bijan Robinson. Both of those statements are wrong. He's not better, nor is he the 56th best player in the NFL. But positional value, all this other stuff, we're not even going to get into whether he's the 56th best player or where Joe Mixon should rank. It's not at 56, 100%. Not even close. But if we want to talk about apples to apples, we can compare Mixon to Bijan. I mean, I don't know what these players are thinking and looking at when they're coming up with their grades. Joe Mixon had only 1,000 rushing yards last year. Bijan Robinson almost had 1,500. Joe Mixon averaged 4.1 yards per rush. Bijan averaged 4.8. Bijan had more touchdowns, more receptions, more receiving yards. So on the basic counting stats a lot of these players are looking at, they don't have subscriptions to True Media or PFF or any NFL Pro or any of the other advanced analytical sites that provide data. They're looking at basic stuff here, or maybe they're just looking at their eye test. In either of those cases, Mixon was worse than Bijan Robinson. But then when you get into the analytical side of things and you're looking at more efficiency-based statistics, out of 35 running backs last year that had at least, I think it's 130 carries, something like, I forget the exact cutoff I used, 35 running backs. Bijan was number 2 in success rate. Joe Mixon was number 34. We're talking about second best versus second worst. In explosive run rate, Bijan was number 1. Joe Mixon was number 35. We're literally talking about the number 1 best versus the number 1 worst. Stuff rate, Bijan Robinson was number 2 best. Joe Mixon was 33rd. EPA, Bijan was number 9. Joe Mixon was number 26. So we're talking about literally in several of these metrics, basically the best running back from an efficiency perspective last year versus the worst. Now, I'm not saying Bijan is the best running back in the NFL, but on a number of these statistics, he was, and Mixon was the worst. So it's just insane to me to think that some of these players would view these two guys closely ranked and rank Mixon ahead of him. Doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Now let's switch gears and talk about an injury that just happened, and that was Isaiah Likely for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, initially this report was that he was going to miss approximately 6 weeks. Now it's coming out that it might be more like 8 weeks. And I think the truth is yet to be determined. We'll see how he ends up doing. But I want to talk a little bit about how this injury impacts the landscape for the Baltimore Ravens to start their season. The easiest thing to say is, it's going to be a factor as it relates to Mark Andrews. From a fantasy perspective, stock up on Mark Andrews. Yes, that's easy. Stock up on Mark Andrews. The Baltimore Ravens, though, last year played the number 1 lowest rate of 3 wide receiver sets. They played the number 1 highest rate of heavy personnel, including 2+ tight end sets on the field. And Isaiah Likely was a massive part of the reason that the Ravens were the lowest 3 wide receiver team and the highest rate of heavy personnel. When Likely was off the field last year in the first half of games, which is what's most important. I don't care in the fourth quarter of a game that the Ravens are up by 12 points or 15 points or 17 points, what the efficiency is at that point. In the first half of games, when Likely is on the field, from a passing perspective, plus 0.3 EPA per attempt. When he's off the field, plus 0.16. That's a massive decline from a passing perspective when Likely is off the field. But what you also have to understand, and why this is a factor in what's going to happen with the Ravens if Likely misses time, is that when they were using those 3+ wide receiver sets, the Ravens' rushing efficiency dips dramatically. When the Ravens are not using 3 wide receiver sets, they're using heavier personnel. They ranked number 1 in EPA and number 1 in success rate last year. But when they shifted and utilized 3 wide receivers, they ranked number 11 in EPA and number 21 in success. That is a massive difference between those two. I inevitably believe that when Likely is not out on the field, the Ravens will have to shift to utilizing more 3 wide receiver sets. It's going to impact their passing game and it's going to impact their running game, because no team wants to use 3 wide receiver sets less than the Baltimore Ravens do in an ideal world. And they're going to be forced to probably without Likely. So the question becomes, how long is Likely out? Or more importantly, what's that ramp up time look like? Because let's say he is able to somehow come back week 1, which seems to be less likely, no pun intended. Week 1, they're playing the Buffalo Bills on the road in Buffalo. Even if he's available, there's going to be a ramp up, right? He's not going to take 100% of the snaps he normally would take. So even if he's available, he's probably going to slowly ramp up. He can't just go full bore like there was no injury at all. So I think that's going to impact him regardless of whether or not he's able to play technically week 1. But if you look at the Ravens' first month of the season, they play the number 2 most difficult schedule in the entire NFL. They play in Buffalo and in Kansas City. They also host the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions. Now, think about this. You've got 3 of the best teams in the NFL there. The Bills, the Chiefs, and the Lions. 2 of those are the teams that are most likely to compete with you in the AFC for the only bye that's being offered. There's 1 bye week that's being offered in the AFC. And generally speaking, it's either going to be won by the Ravens, the Bills, or the Chiefs. And right now, you've got road games against the Bills and the Chiefs in week 1 and week 4, and you're playing at a rest disadvantage in that game week 4. So to me, this is a bigger deal than I think some other people are probably making it. I think it's not the end-all be-all for sure. It's not Lamar Jackson, which would matter the most. It is minor in the bigger landscape, but it's going to change how the Ravens are going to utilize their personnel groupings from what they want to do to what they're going to be forced to do. And they're going to have to deal with the biggest competition, the second toughest schedule in the NFL off the gate. It's a tough injury. It's something that I think isn't getting discussed enough. Hopefully he's back, and hopefully he beats the time frame, and hopefully he doesn't have a long ramp-up period, and hopefully he's full go by week 1. But let's see what happens here. Next up, I want to discuss this Cam Ward quote that happened in yesterday's press conference, player availability, where he said, "We are very mid right now." And a lot of people view that as a negative. Oh my God, if the Titans' own quarterback is saying that they stink and that they're mid, then this team must be horrific. This team's not going to have a shot. And I don't know what their ceiling is going to be, but I viewed it completely the opposite way. I viewed it as a quarterback having a lot of self-awareness, having extremely high standards, having a lot of personal accountability, and leadership. And that's hard to come by for young quarterbacks that are trying to prove something, that are trying to make themselves into being the leader of the team and like the best player. Maybe they're deflecting blame elsewhere. Maybe they're not willing to talk about it in some of their press conferences. He took it on his shoulders and said, "We're mid, we need to get better. We're a young team, but that's not an excuse. This performance won't be tolerated. It starts with me, but it also is my line. It also is my receiving core." He's basically putting everyone on blast to an extent, but taking the bulk of the responsibility himself. I think that's extremely commendable. I think it's extremely rare. I think it's a great sign of things to come from Cam Ward. I hope he has a great career. He's certainly a big competitor. And I'm really hoping that we get to see him go up against Shedeur Sanders when the Tennessee Titans play the Cleveland Browns. I want to say it's like week 13 or week 14 in the season. Because if you saw some of those videos that came out over the when they were practicing against one another, practicing with each other, but competing, I mean, there's a lot of trash talking involved. That would be a fun game if we were able to see Cam go up against Shedeur later this season. But I did not view this quote as a negative. I think it was a big time positive, and was excited and pleased to hear a young quarterback. It was refreshing to hear somebody talk like that. Another thing I want to mention is, where do touchdowns come from? We've posted some research up on sharpfootballanalysis.com that you can dig into a little bit more. But I want you guys to be aware of that 73% of all passing touchdowns come from inside of the red zone. And I shared some of the statistics, who were the best quarterbacks passing the football inside of the red zone last year. And the top 5 were Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Bo Nix, Tua, and Joe Burrow. Those were the top 5 quarterbacks in efficiency passing the football inside of the red zone. And that's where you have to be the most efficient. 3 out of every 4 passing touchdowns are coming from inside of the red zone. You have to be efficient when you're down there. The other thing that I posted was a stat about teams' pass rate inside the 10-yard line. And the reason why this stat was important, I don't think a lot of people caught on to this, 75% of all rushing touchdowns come from inside the 10-yard line. If you are working in an offense with a coordinator that's very pass heavy, you are inside the 10, you're not going to have as much of a chance to score a lot of rushing touchdowns. The case in point, the New York Jets last year, they're the #1 most pass rate team inside of the 10-yard line. 70% of the time, they had an early down play inside of the 10-yard line. I would say, yeah, this is an early down play. They were passing the football with Aaron Rodgers. That limited the touchdown upside for Breece Hall or somebody like that. Now, we know that some of the coaching staff came from Detroit to the Jets. And this is what I'm kind of leading into. The Lions were 33% pass, one of the most run-heavy teams in the NFL inside of the 10-yard line. That might carry over more so into the Jets this year, being a far more run-heavy team inside the 10-yard line, which could provide upside for some of those running backs, opportunities that they didn't have last year, when I'm talking about on a futures market from a betting perspective. The other thing here is you look at some of these other coordinators and where they went. Right? Like, where did some of these coordinators go? And I'm not going to get into details because one of these specifically relates to probably a prop that I feel the most strongest, a player prop that I feel the most strongest about. It relates to a coordinator moving and setting up shop somewhere else and how it's going to impact that offense and their strategy and their philosophy and some of the upside expectations. And we're giving out one of these futures tomorrow. And like I said, it's one of my favorite ones. I'll talk about it more later, maybe in the summer after the market has moved. Some of the futures that we give out, the market definitely moves a lot. And I want to make sure that we are capitalizing on that first. Clients of Sharp Football Analysis on our futures before we go ahead and talk more publicly about this play. But it's one of my favorite. It's backed by some of these statistics. Speaking of stats that are a little bit more in your face, 2025 football preview book here is chock full of them. 585 pages, 32 different team chapters. I highly suggest you get yourself a copy of this book. It's the Bible to many people as they enter their prep time for the NFL. It's a perfect time right now to get your hands on a copy of this book. You can get the printed book up on Amazon. If you want the PDF though, and you want to save $10, go to sharp.football and enter the code SHARP10. That will save $10 off the PDF of this book. No better time to get involved now if you haven't already gotten your copy. There's plenty of time with very actionable and valuable information here, whether it relates to your fantasy drafts, whether it relates to betting futures, player futures, team futures, etc. Get yourself a copy of this book. So with that said, we're going to be back sooner rather than later, talking all things training camp, talking all things news and notes, talking all things injuries. Unfortunately, those are going to certainly happen. What is the impact of those injuries? We're going to be discussing it right here. So make sure that you're subscribed to our Sharp Football Analysis channel over at YouTube. I'll see you guys soon.